So we're here today to talk to Sand Bagoon, who has been a dear friend for a number of years. Sand and I have been blessed, I feel blessed anyway, to have worked together to prepare a program on protection, psychic protection, which was really fun to do. And we've already talked a little bit before we started recording this about the fact that we're going to try to be very disciplined and keep this to a listenable amount of time because when Sand and I get together, we can really go to town. I think the most important thing before I ask you some questions, Sand, is just to tell folks who are listening that I've always been very impressed with your credentials and the way you comported yourself in workshops and in the work we've done. As a PhD in counseling psychology, you have what I call is brilliant street cred. So you're not somebody who has done esoteric work and just kind of lives in that fuzzy zone all the time. You have a wonderful balance. You have done work with people living real lives with different kinds of situations. I was looking at the list that you'd sent to me
Mm.
about grieving, anxiety, learning and studying skills. I mean, there's a host of things that you've helped people deal with in a very concrete, ordinary world reality sense. But you've also explored the other side of reality. And so I'm pleased to have this conversation with you, and I hope we can talk a little bit about the balance that you find or what you find complements both of those sides of the world in which you walk. So, welcome. Hi.
Thank you, Shayna. I'm delighted to be here. I'm really thrilled with your YouTube new adventure, and I'm glad to be invited to participate and see. This is I see this as a continuation of the conversation we've been having for many years now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's just coming out in a different iteration.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
which is fun. I mean, like we were saying, can we teach old dogs new tricks? I have heard that an old dog can learn new tricks, and so that's very encouraging to me. Rough.
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 Right.
Sometimes it is rough. So anyway, so Sand, you have done um, this path of psychology. As you're walking that path, what do you find contributes to it from your esoteric walk? Can you, I mean, I know that's like a huge question. And if there's another question you can think of right out of the box,
Well,
I'll let you pick.
no, let's go with that. The two merge and integrate. It took a while.
Hmm. Sure.
Um, but there's, as a psychologist, I will always conceptualize what I see going on around me psychodynamically, which means
Right.
I'm looking both at the content that we talk about at the literal level and the what's going on underneath level. There's a latent level
Okay.
underneath that tells a story that's more about the unconscious
Okay.
and has to do with human motivation. So I see that in all relationships.
Mm.
Um, I also now see energy exchange. Sometimes literally see the energy, at this point flowing between two people or getting blocked,
Hmm.
or sometimes one of my power animals will be kind of guiding my attention in a particular direction as I'm
Hmm.
talking with someone, or even as I'm working on them in some other healing form. So all the practices come together at this point. I do want to say something that I think is really important
Okay.
about the difference between psychology and shamanic practices. The actual word psychologist is licensed in, I think, every state in the United States.
Right.
And the purpose of licensing is actually to protect the consumer.
Hmm.
And that's really important. Psychologists must have a minimum level of training in order to pass the state exams and be authorized personnel. And so that is a very important thing to keep in mind because psychologists receive certain training that qualifies them, and they're not supposed to do certain things in the consulting office that are not considered psychology.
Right. Right. So this
So
is. Hmm.
therein lies a problem potentially. So I would have loved, and I think there are people who do have a practice where I could just outwardly combine. We're sitting and we're talking, and then we do a shamanic piece, and then we maybe get a massage table and do an energy piece. But as a psychologist, I can't do that because I
Right.
can't perform those activities that are not deemed, standard, custom in whatever that phrase is, customary. Uh, Although psychology is changing, and there's some things that, with enough research, they do become admitted into what the training programs. An example would be the bilateral stimulation. What was that? EMDR, the eye movement processing for trauma victims. Initially, people were like, "What are you talking about?" But there's been a ton of research that backs that, and now it is in training programs, and it's absolutely a part of psychology training. So that's an
Right.
example of how things come into acceptance with research in the world of
Hmm.
psychology. So that said, oh, and I will mention also some of your people may know of Sandra Harner.
Right. I was going to mention her book.
Yeah, well, she is both a clinical or counseling, so she's a licensed psychologist in
Right.
California and a shamanic practitioner who I believe co-founded with Michael the Foundation for Shamanic
Exactly.
Studies. Okay. She 20 years ago told me that she actually has a informed consent that she has her shamanic clients sign so they understand she's seeing them not as a psychologist, and that once they become shamanic clients, they can never become psychotherapy clients of hers. So
Right.
for her, it was a very strict separation, and it was to
Absolutely.
protect her license. And we have to keep in mind that our licenses are there to protect the clients.
Exactly. And
So,
so I think you bring up a number of good points just for people who are listening. Emma's Odyssey is a book that Sandra Harner wrote with regard to her working with a client in a shamanic way.
mhm.
And I think in that book she discusses this very strict line that she had between a psychotherapy client and a shamanic client. But you bring up a very important part about dealing with people because we're talking in our context right here healing practices, the
Right.
shamanic healing practice and the psychotherapy healing practice. These are
Mhm.
healing practices. And so we're looking at basically, you brought up the good idea about the ethics of the practitioner, those things that are set in place to protect clients. Because there are a lot of people out there who think that if they put shamanic in front of anything, somehow that gives them carte blanche or something, or somehow makes them. I think it gives them the cachet that they need to draw clients and make money, and that isn't always a good thing. So
No, it's not.
the
It's
heads up
not.
piece, the first straight out of the box here is vet your practitioner. Know
Absolutely.
know what your practitioner has done in terms of training, how much, how long, the number of clients, whatever, and actually ask some questions. Do you feel comfortable with this person? How does this feel for you? Do you think you can have a good working relationship?
I absolutely agree. And I'd say the same thing for the psychology if you're seeking a
Absolutely.
psychologist.
Right. Yeah.
But we're talking about, shamanic practices. And I think
Yes.
it's everything you said, I just want to really highlight. I agree with
Yes.
you entirely.
Well,
It's very important.
yeah, and I'm really glad that you shot that first out of the box because the licensing and
Mhm.
shamans aren't licensed in this country. Now, I think they're in several places they're looking to see about licensing, but a lot of the alternative forms of healing, alternative meaning they're not allopathic medicine or licensed procedures, you really have to be very careful about who you choose and what you expect from the relationship, just so that you know you're safe yourself. Because typically, anybody coming into a situation has experienced some kind of trauma or drama in their lives, and you don't want that to be compounded by a bad experience with a practitioner who may not be as ethical as you would like,
As ethical or even as aware.
as aware.
We're all
Beautiful.
wounded healers
Yep. Beautiful.
ourselves.
Hmm.
We don't want
Absolutely.
that to bleed. And, I've always thought we can only come as far as healers as we've been able to come as patients, clients, whatever word you want to use. But, our journey on the path limits us.
Absolutely. It is. And I think that's a beautiful point to make that unless you've had the tears, you don't know what they're like. You don't know. And the wounded healer is such a great phrase. You know, it's physician heal thyself is
Exactly.
really what it is.
And the level of consciousness about that so that you're not seeing your own issues in everybody else. You
Right.
know, transference is what it's called, or countertransference, I guess, in psychology. But we oftentimes you see healers who see the same problem that they have in every client who comes to us. Like, probably not. You know,
Right. Right. Right.
yeah.
Well,
So
and
the overlap, though. Oh, what were you going to ask?
I was going to say the beauty of that is when you're working as a psychotherapist, you're working with yourself and your training. When we
Mm-hmm.
shift into the shamanic work, if you're really practicing shamanism, you're not relying on yourself for any of the answers. You're
Right.
relying on the information that comes to you from helping spirits, which is such a relief in some way because you don't have to see somebody and say, "Oh my God, what do I do?" It's okay. This person has come to me. My compassionate heart is open to help from the spirit world. What do you instruct me to do? And you become the hollow bone, which is it's a different foundation from which to work.
It's a huge difference. I think it's a major difference. And getting to the point where you are familiar enough with your spirit helpers that you've done the work to really get to know them, to understand the messages that they're giving you, to pay attention, to remember and embrace, that
Hmm.
they're there,
Right.
is hugely different than what you do as a psychologist. In psychology, you're assessing, noticing, watching, and running through what is the best intervention for this client.
Hmm.
And it's very integrative because there's many interventions that can be
Right. Right.
chosen and many paths that you can go down with that. But if you want guidance, you have to go to other practitioners. You need to get, you
Right.
know, consultations.
Hmm.
What am I missing? What's going on here? I'm stuck, or
Hmm.
can I, deepen the work in some way that I'm missing, etc. Whereas in the shamanic world, and you call for help, and your helpers are right there.
Right. Right. That's interesting. So, it's the difference between having kind of a checklist and colleagues. It's being open to whatever comes through and trusting.
Right. I think that that's true. Now that said, just because I'm sitting with a psychology client um,
Right.
doesn't mean that my helpers don't come.
Hmm.
And I'll get a nudge, whether it's a psychotherapy session or a healing session that's not a shamanic one or whatever. I'll have my power animals will show up and they'll say, look over here. What about this? Come on, this is what's going on. Or they'll show me a picture or give me a symbol. It's like, oh, of course.
And
So
so, yeah,
that's where information comes from.
mhm. Right, right. So it sounds like somebody could say, "Oh, but that's just your intuition." So how would you explain to someone the difference between having an intuition, a gut feeling, versus working with a power animal or another spiritual ally? Is there a way that you would frame that for someone?
That is a very um, foundational question. And it took me a while. I mean, in my shamanic training, it took me a while to tease that out.
Hmm.
Um, I remember the exercise when I first got it for sure. Dana was leading the workshop,
Okay.
and we had two people in the workshop had teamed up in pairs. And first, one person went. We had a designated entry point to the lower world. First, one person went, and I don't remember how long we waited, a minute, 2 minutes, couldn't have been more because it's actually a very long period of time. And we went in and we were to find them
Oh, okay.
and
The
and
tracking
follow the tracking exercise,
tracking
exactly.
exercise. Yes, okay.
And when we came back, we each had seen each other and were able to talk about what we had seen before the other person told us what they had done, where they had been.
Right, okay.
And I that was the first time that I got that. Oh my God, this is realer than I thought.
Okay.
That
Hmm.
there was that extra piece of oh my,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. And so um but we don't always get that in too many ways. So the question you asked was, how do I know the difference? How do I know this isn't just some random thought of my own? First of all, um, just because I'm imagining it doesn't mean it's not real,
Perfect. Yeah.
right? And the other is that I've come to know my own thoughts and the way my thinking patterns typically behave.
Hmm.
And that's a part, we talked about this in protection, actually. Knowing ourselves so that we can
Yes.
recognize when the voice we're hearing is not our own.
Hmm.
And, I'm not talking about psychotic influences, I'm talking
No,
about
but me or not me. Yeah.
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, is that the kind of thing that I would think? Is that the kind of thing that I would say? How did I know that?
Hmm.
Those are the kinds of things that could underline this understanding, or even just a physical feeling of, oh, that rings true, that feels right, that vibes with me. There's lots of ways that people will feel the
Right.
centeredness, the connectedness, the groundingness of something versus, ooh, that's flaky, or that's something I hadn't thought of
Right.
at all. Um, Maybe I'll try that on, but where does it come from? So the where does it come from piece is important, and I think that comes with practice.
Mm. Right. Right. It's not something that just happens. And I think you almost, I think you said it. Know thyself. I mean, Polonius, above all, know thyself.
Yeah.
And one of the things that has come to me lately, I've been looking at this, it's almost like street use of the entheogens, those kind of psychedelics that are the word entheogen came into vogue in 1979 to separate it from the idea of the drug culture of psychedelics and hallucinogens. Although most entheogens, which are supposed to connect you to God, theo in the word,
Mm-hmm.
but anyway, the point is, I think a lot of people use those and consider them shamanic. In some cultures, they certainly are, as a
Mm-hmm.
magic bullet. Like, I do this, and all my life is going to be unicorns and fuzzy bunnies. The magic bullet. And what you're telling me, and what I'm hearing, I think, as part of this, and I was going to actually ask you about it, is that we really have to do our deep work. The
Oh, yeah.
work with a capital W. And it is that work with a capital W that helps us to make some of these discernments that we've been talking about me or
Mm-hmm.
not me, my thoughts based on my schooling versus the helping spirits informing me of something new and novel, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think the this is even a bigger question. It's straying a bit from what we're talking about. Somebody comes to you and pretend in a perfect world that you can do all sorts of things and it
Right.
doesn't matter on your license. So they come to you, they've had some kind of trauma. You know that they require a soul retrieval. My question is that truly the magic bullet, or do you think in this world that there should be some complementary work that helps them process, integrate, and do the big work as opposed to thinking, oh, I've had a soul retrieval, now everything's fine?
Well,
I mean that's a huge question, but
no, it's a simple question. A soul retrieval all by itself is almost, I don't want to say meaningless, but it's not it's not as meaningful as it could be with the work of understanding. Why did this soul part flee in the first place? Why this particular part? Where has this soul part been? Why is it waited until now in my lifetime to be able to be noticed and come back?
hmm
What do I need to do? What conversation do I need to have with the soul part to enhance our understanding and reintegrate, reform the relationship that got broken at what age 5, 10, 20, whenever this traumatic event occurred,
hmm
even if it was yesterday. I might
right,
have a better chance with yesterday actually, because I'll know what it was about.
right,
But oftentimes we don't know what it's about. And so the work of understanding what's going on, of seeing the soul part, of communicating, I'm repeating myself, the work needs to be done. Otherwise,
Right.
the soul part isn't integrated. The soul part is in danger actually of fleeing again, because what they come back to, nothing.
Right. Right.
They're
Yeah.
not being recognized. They weren't missed. And the person has so much to gain by reintegrating this part of themselves.
Right. Hmm.
So we've both obviously heard of shamans who just, hang out their shingle, do a soul retrieval, say, oh, well, that little girl piece came back, good to go. No, no, you got to talk to the little girl. You got to find out what's going
Right.
on. That little girl is you, a part of
Exactly.
you. You have to integrate.
Right.
You don't get
Right.
past these things. You don't
Right.
get to
You don't get to
integrate.
pass go
Yeah. You have
without
to.
addressing these things.
Right.
Um, so what suggestion would you make to someone who and there's so many tire kickers out there. It's like, okay, I have problems. I'm going to go see a shaman. I've had 20 soul retrievals. Nothing seems to help. Um, what kind of advice would you give to someone around this idea of soul retrieval, which has been popularized? I mean, Sandra Ingerman wrote about this many years ago, and that has always seemed to be the big cake. If anybody's going to do
Mm-hmm.
anything in shamanic work, I want to learn how to do soul retrievals, and I need to get one. What would you
Didn't
say?
she also write a book called something like Welcome Home or something
She
like
did.
that, that's about the reintegration process?
I think she did.
I think
Absolutely.
she did, yeah. So it's sort of like, people reading, the first book in oh, come on, Zan. I'll come back to it, but not going on to the later information.
Right. Right.
That they just got to step one.
Hmm.
They're not moving on to it. So someone who came my way with 20 soul retrievals and still feeling icky, I'd kind of like want to reassess what's going on. I would have a consultation with the person. I'd have a consultation with my spirit guides, my power animals, um, and other guides, not just the animals,
Sure.
and get a sense of, do we know what's going on here? Is this the right path for this person? Do they need something else? Is there
Beautiful.
something else that needs to happen?
Hmm.
Sometimes, I mean, there's a basic rule, I think, in all healing, that you need to kind of, out with the bad before in with the good. You need to
Right. Right.
extract and
Hmm.
depossess and cleanse the person before you can then bring in a power animal, a soul part that has fled, etc. So maybe a step in the process is missing. Maybe these soul parts can't get in or can't stay because there's something going on, um ex- existentially, really,
Right.
that's keeping them from staying. So the extraction work,
Hmm.
I would check for possession, those kinds
Sure.
of things too.
You remind me of that story. I think the Zen master who's trying to teach something to a student, and the student is just, you know, not taking it in. Is just very um, not accepting the information. And so the Zen master puts a cup in front of the student and pours tea into it and continues to pour tea into it and continues to pour tea in it.
Um,
And the student says, "You're pouring so much tea in it, it's overflowing, it's overflowing." He said, "You can't get any more tea in there." And the Zen master says, "You're right. And until you empty your mind, you can't get anything else in there." So I think the whole idea about going back to basics and are you clean? Are you empty? Are you receptive? Can you receive? You've had all this work, but you're not receiving. What's blocking the reception? What's blocking the reception?
yeah,
I think that's a great point. A great point that, not all healing is about soul retrieval. Not all healing is about power animal retrieval. And I think the beautiful point is just like physicians, shamans put things in, shamans take things out. And the whole point of it is to balance the vehicle that's holding the spirit power, our spirit energy, our life force.
right.
Balance it. And you can't do it if you overload it.
And
With
here I'll bring in another point that some shamanic people disagree with, and this may show my bias toward the therapy piece. I think that a conversation or more with the clients about what's happened and getting a sense of their experience and how things make sense or don't make sense for them is really important to the healing process. There are some
right,
people I know who are trained, you just do the work, it's done.
right.
But I know, I think from my own experience, I that wouldn't work for me.
I
I
understand
need
that.
to understand. I need
Mhm,
to tease it out. I need to make the connections with other things that have happened in my life, have that aha
mhm.
experience. And
Yes, but I think I understand where that I've done the work and now work on the healing. I think I understand where that
mm,
comes from. I think it comes from the idea that not everybody who's doing shamanic work has the same kind of ethics and has the same kind of freedom from ego. And
mm,
so if I'm doing shamanic work for you and I tell you my whole big story and here it is, and you tell me it's not like that, then there's this power play that we've suddenly
mm,
developed. I'm right, you're wrong. And that's inappropriate. Or I've suddenly given you a whole different narrative that has nothing to do with you, and now you're really confused. So, because when I think the point to make too here about our shamanic viewing, when we're doing this work, it is highly metaphoric. So when I'm having visions and experiencing connections with my helping spirits, they are talking to me in Shana language.
exactly.
Shana language may not translate completely well to sand language. And if I try to tell you something in Shana language and it comes through very differently in sand language, I may have added some trauma to something that was already a big kerfuffle. And so instead of healing you, I've sent you out the door with just another sausage in the window. Just remembering somebody saying about how if you're not clear, it's like you have sausages hanging in the window. And the
Obstructing
idea
the view.
is to
Uh,
clear the sausages in the window.
um,
So, you don't want to add to somebody's issues. So,
well, that's an interesting issue in and of itself for figuring out who's your client and what's this client's needs going
right.
to be, and how do I best serve this client.
Hmm.
And so there are some people that we go into more depth with, and others,
Right.
people who will understand it metaphorically,
Right.
and people who are able to say, no, that doesn't really fit. And I'm able to say, then all you need to know is that this is what it looked like to me.
Right.
Something was removed, something was
Mhm.
returned, and it may be a very different experience for you
Right.
from what I observed. So,
Yeah. Now, so as you're doing that, do you think it is your training as a psychotherapist which enables you to step back enough from that to not have your ego involved?
oh, sure.
So, a lot of people who go into shamanism don't have that training, right? And so
Well,
again, we're at that point where, again, are you comfortable with your practitioner? Is your practitioner trying to tell you something that boosts them versus helping you?
and we've all seen that. We've seen
Yeah,
that with lots of different kinds of energy healers, who
exactly.
it becomes about them
Right,
instead of about the client. Yeah, and that's true in all fields of healing. It's probably true in all fields of relationships, actually.
right.
The power
It's the
differentials,
right, the power, but the balance, the balance.
right? Right. I
So
think
I,
in healing, um, if a client is resonating with what you say, you'll hear words like, yes, exactly. And if you're not hearing that, I pull back a little bit. I say,
right.
okay, maybe I'm off. Or sometimes I'll say something and the client will say, no, that's wrong. Well, that's not time to fight them and say, oh, no, I'm not wrong. What, you're wrong?
Right.
No, that's not it at all. It means either I misinterpreted something, or I was premature in bringing it up and they're not ready to hear it,
Mm,
or, or whatever. But it's not the right time, or I'm just completely off. And I
hmm.
need to. step back and let the client go. I don't want to get in the client's way.
Right, right, right. So I think this is a good time to talk about the shaman as the hollow bone.
Hmm.
Um, and I've always understood that as, and I think this kind of rounds out some of our conversation. If you are doing shamanic work, that means you are really out of the way yourself. And your sense of who you are and your worth is not bound in how you perform with a client. You are just there, number one, to ask for help, number two, to deliver help. You're not there to judge it right, wrong, good, bad, or other. You're really just taking the direction from the helping spirits. You're necessary because
Hmm.
you're the conduit, but it's not up to you to in any way be, I don't even know what a good word. You could probably come up with a good word, but it's not about you. It's about the spirits getting the message to the client.
I,
Go ahead.
I actually think that's true in psychotherapy also. In the psychotherapy sessions that are most fruitful, most helpful, most awe inspiring for the clients, sometimes for me as well, but it's about the client,
Hmm.
are the ones where I'm just there with the client and we enter together. And I
Hmm.
think this is where the shamanic journey and the psychotherapy journey are, I'll say similar instead of the same, but who
Okay.
knows. It's an inner journey. And the surprise is that the inner journey takes you into these multiple realities that you didn't know were there. It
Hmm.
goes down into your unconscious and out into multiple worlds. And it's personal and it's transpersonal and it's transgenerational and it's universal and it's Jungian archetypes and symbols and it's oh, what was his name? I have a list of Joseph Campbell's work
Right.
with world mythology and again archetypes. And
Right.
when we step into that space, the archetype descends and the healer or the magician or grandfather shaman is
Right.
there and you are merged and you might even know it because you're just doing the work. You're being the
Right.
hollow bone.
Hmm. Which is, yeah, I get shivers just thinking about the way you spoke of that because what you're doing is you're opening space. You as your presence, the presence opens the space for the help to arrive.
The
And
word I
then
use is allow.
allow.
And my mantra with my clients has always been allow yourself to see what you see, allow yourself to know what you know.
I love it. I love it. To allow. And once you allow it, then you have choice. You don't even have to exercise choice
It's all
until you
there
allow.
for you. Yeah. The
That
path
is
is made clear.
right. That's so cool. I love it.
And do I experience that with every psychotherapy client? No. Some people are not going to be there for that kind of experience.
Hmm.
But the ones who are, and sometimes they surprise me.
Oh,
People come in at first, they're guarded, of course. They don't know who I am, but with time, then
yeah.
then they too have to open. And so oftentimes, I would see a client come in, sit down, and go right into trance.
Wow. That
And I'm
must have
like,
been very interesting.
well, it's like, okay, we're ready. Others need to come in and breathe a little and settle down from traffic or whatever the day events were, or the tragedy of, they've come to talk about. But
Right.
others go right into trance. They sit down and I see their eyes change and they're ready for the work.
Amazing. Amazing. So it's recognizing those different states
Very
in
much so.
which where you meet people, where you actually meet them,
Yeah.
different states. So which gets us right into another topic about the altered state. So when you're doing work, uh, did you encourage in terms of your clinical work. Did you ever work with altered states with people,
Oh,
talking them
sure.
down into a trance? And how does that compare, do you think, to perhaps instructing someone in the journey?
Very similar. Very similar. Um, there's outright hypnosis, which can
Right.
be helpful for some clients. Then there's more of what we think of as Ericksonian hypnosis, which is a more subtle working with what's going on with the client. You're not actually sitting there doing an induction into a hypnotic state, but
Right.
you're helping them move toward an altered state
Hmm.
that once they're in, they're more relaxed and they're open to their inner journey and the imaging that comes up for them. And then it's easier and therefore more helpful, I think. It's not just because it's easier for me, but the process goes more easily to help them with guided meditation or
Okay.
just, just to see, to help them. Let me give you an example to make this clearer. um, a client's trying to understand something and they're confused about it. So maybe we'll take a few deep breaths, settle down, close your eyes, picture yourself in a meadow. There's a river running through it, follow it, and away they go. And very typically, they end up going down into some stream or over some waterfall or into the ground or there's a hole or whatever. And there they are. Do I tell them they've gone into the, lower worlds? No, I don't say that. In fact, when I first was learning about it, I didn't even know about that. So,
Right.
but away we went on all kinds of journeys, inner
Right.
journeys where they discovered long ago parts of themselves that they had set aside and now they reintegrated. So, what is that? That's a soul retrieval.
Right.
Or the time that the client was walking down the path and it went into the forest and there was a tree and it had a hole in it. And I said, oh, you could probably go into that hole. You could go up or you could go down. She said, no, I don't need to. She's right here. And her 5-year-old self was sitting there waiting for her.
Amazing.
So,
Amazing.
you know, that was psychotherapy and it was a shamanic journey.
Wow. And so now here comes even the bigger question. Psychotherapy, not within the context of shamanism, yet people are spontaneously having what you would call shamanic type experiences. So would you concur with the idea that all of us, all humans, we're hardwired to do these things and use these kinds of techniques to help and balance and heal ourselves and others?
My first impulse is to say yes. Well, let me think for a moment. We might be. It's really hard to tease out the social pieces and the religious training that we go through,
Right.
where we're told, if I had said, I just saw grandpa who died before I was born, I would be told, no, I don't think you did, as opposed to, oh, really? Tell me about that.
Hmm.
Okay.
Right.
So the hard wiring may be suppressed in order to fit in or to avoid judgment from an important parent.
Right.
Um, so
So the
I
the hard wiring might be there, but it can't express itself because of social constrictions.
I think for a lot of people that's true.
Yeah.
And then there's others who just, it's just there. It's a part of their reality, and they may not recognize what it is, or they may be frightened to admit what it is. They may think there's something wrong with them. I
Right.
remember one time someone came to me who had had a dream about someone important in both our lives dying. And he had the dream the night before this other person died.
Wow.
And his comment to me was, Sand, I need to see a psychiatrist. And I said, why? And he told me the story. I said, no, you don't need to see a psychiatrist. No, and so, but he thought it meant that there was something really wrong with him.
Wow. Okay, so there's a fear component
For some people,
for some
sure.
people. Fear.
Uh, and then there's somebody else I worked with who was very interested in having power animal retrieval, and I brought back actually 2 animals. And she said, "I know who you brought back, and they've been with me my entire life. I've always known they were here." And she told me who they were, and that's exactly who I brought back.
Wow. Amazing.
So she got validation.
Right. So it it's fascinating to me the workings of our human minds, our
Yeah.
souls, our spirits, how it's so much more than this 3D reality that we live in and have been I don't know, what would you say we've been brainwashed? Do you think what do you think or distracted by enchantments? What do you think has happened to us that we've lost some of the magic of these deep interconnections with the unseen world that are just as important as knowing that this is a desk and that I can call on the telephone? What do you think?
That is a huge question.
Yeah,
There's multiple things. I mean, we entered the age of reason. We entered the age of science. We entered the age of,
sure.
if you can't see it, it doesn't exist.
Right.
Show me, prove it. All of that. We also live in for thousands of years, actually, um, power through religious subjugation. You must believe this.
Right.
And in
Right.
shamanism, it's not about belief.
No.
It's about experience. I
Mm,
don't believe I have power animals. I know I have power animals.
right.
There's a difference.
Hmm.
There's no leap of faith involved at all.
Right.
Um, and so we've been cut off from personal experience, told that we're wrong. Fear has been introduced. A lot of the symbols, the world symbols, have been turned into horrible things.
Well, like the swastika.
That's
I mean,
exactly what I was just thinking. Yeah,
that's just been perverted.
right.
And
Or
so
horns.
horns,
Horns,
the horns of the goat, which are the
right,
connections, your antenna to the upper world. I mean, it's suddenly,
right. So
yeah,
all of these things that have been subverted and demonized,
right,
literally, literally demonized,
right,
um, yeah,
literally,
have
yeah.
made people be afraid,
Hmm.
and they're afraid of themselves, and they're told that when they have these other thoughts, that it's sin. And what is sin? Anything that takes you away from God. And this concept of God as, punishing, and, you're going to hell, and all of that. And so I think there's a lot of fear that
Hmm.
people have to,
Right.
I'm thinking of a client who came in, um, and she was experiencing a spirit person who she knew had died coming to her in the night
Wow.
and talking to her, just a friend
Yeah.
talking to her. She came in, she thought she was crazy.
Wow.
She thought that there was something seriously wrong with her. And I worked with her about that, and she came to realize that this actually was a visit, and he was trying to tell her something. And when she opened up to let him tell her, he left. He said goodbye and thanked her and loved her and left.
Wow. And so
So
it was
she
a
had
gift that had been she wasn't accepting the gift
exactly.
because of the fear and the programming. The programming.
She had been trained that this was wrong, that
Yeah.
she should not be able to do that, that her religion was very much against that.
Hmm.
Um, and yet there's other religions that embrace that very thing.
Right.
Communication with the spirits of your loved ones
Oh,
who've
the
died.
spiritists. I mean, their whole lives are wrapped around it. 6 hours a day
Right,
for some people. Just we're
right.
having these conversations.
So your question is huge. Well, the question is simple. The answer
Yeah.
is
You reminded
mind
me
blowing.
of a fascinating book by Charles Taylor called, I think it's as opposed to the, I'm not sure of the article, The Secular Age. And he
Mm,
goes through a lengthy discussion of just what you've mentioned, how we were very porous people when we lived. We were porous. We didn't really have boundaries because our awareness went so far beyond this skin encapsulation. But then, as society grew around us, it got more congested. We became civilized. We became buffered. And it was this buffering that began to shut us down. And, with
wow.
civilization, it's like okay, we have to have these manners, we have to have these protocols so that when we sit down at the dinner table, I hold my knife in this hand and my fork in this hand because that demonstrates that I'm not going to use my knife to kill you. I mean, it's crazy stuff that, we just shut down. So, um,
Crazy now.
crazy
But I
now.
think when those things started,
Oh,
it wasn't
yeah,
so crazy.
exactly.
The civilization came about as a way to survive.
Exactly. Exactly. Thanks for that correction because you're right. All of these things have made sense. I think it's probably like a lot of the laws on our books. There were
Oh, yeah.
many laws on our books that made great sense at the time they were written, but now we've outgrown some of that and we know differently.
Right.
So,
Right. And that's the same thing as, you'll forgive me, but that's what soul retrieval is about. The soul fragment left to survive
beautiful. Thank you for saying that.
and comes back when it's safe,
Hmm.
when they understand more, or when the person, if a soul fragment of mine has left and then I grow up and I'm a different person now, or I've integrated more information, that soul part can come back because now I can survive whatever was happening. And
Exactly.
same thing with these civilization
Hmm.
pieces, that it all, we all come by our defenses, honestly. I know you've heard me say that one before.
Yes.
And it's true.
And I've got a great example for that. I was just thinking of that as you were saying that. My own soul. I remember sitting at the kitchen table when I was a little kid, nursery school, singing a song. My mother said, "That's not the tune." Well, that little soul part checked out and decided that the rule would be never sing again. But then you get to a point where the rule you see is very foolish and you're missing out. And at some point, I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm going to sing I Don't Care. Summer camp, probably. And then begin singing, and suddenly the rule no longer matters, and that soul piece feels safe to return. So these things can happen spontaneously.
Yes.
It doesn't always require a shaman, but you notice them
Oh,
if you
yes.
sit and take a little time and recognize when you have a rule, as we're talking about these rules of protocols within civilization that no longer make sense, and suddenly you allow again a different expression.
I'm so glad you allowed your voice back because you have a beautiful voice
Oh,
and you can sing English
thank you.
too.
Well, I like to sing to the trees and the cat doesn't mind. And so who cares, We do karaoke at water exercise. But and that's really tough because there's a lot of splashing going on. But yeah, so this is such a fascinating conversation. I want to thank you at this moment for our conversation to this point. I think we'll give it a little break here, and maybe will you agree maybe to come and we'll chat some more?
Absolutely. I had no idea our time had passed so quickly. So,
I I know. Time with every time I speak with you, it always goes so quickly because you just are such a font of information and you bring things to such crisp points that I appreciate it. So thank you.
wow. Well, thank you.
So
Thank you very
I hope to see you next time.
To be continued.
To
I
be
look forward to
continued.
it. Okay, then.
Stay on.
Okay.